Senator Ruston.
Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President. Tonight I'd like to talk about something that I think is extremely important, and I think a lot of Australians think is extremely important, and that is labels on our food products. For decades, Australians have been told how important food labelling is for the economy, is for workers and especially for the farmers to buy Australian. And the reason that it is so important that we buy Australian is because it just plainly makes sense, Mr Acting Deputy President. It's a simple message, so I think that everybody understood, and it also appeals to us because we want to do the right thing by our great country and the food producers that are here. It also appeals to us because we know how good our products are, especially our food. Our farmers are undoubtedly the best in the world, and the food that they produce is the best in the world, and Australia is plainly famous for it. Our country has one of the greatest global reputations for quality, for high standards and for integrity in our food products. And one of the most important things that we actually have in this country, and we should never, never underestimate it, Mr Acting Deputy President, is the fact that our food is safe. So I think Australians want to buy Australian food for all of these reasons. But for many, many years, I think Australians have been oh so terribly, terribly frustrated by our food labelling system. Because I don't actually think that so far we've come up with a system that really tells us what we want to know about our food. And I think as we go by, there is definitely a greater level of interest about the quality and the products that go into our food. But also I think there's a greater interest to know where our foods actually come from. And I think that we have every right and many, many reasons to know what we're eating and what we're drinking and where it comes from. And that means we have every right and many reasons to implement a system that provides clear, simple, unambiguous information about Australian and non-Australian content in our food products. And this is why the Australian government has sought to have a positive response from Australian consumers to its proposed new labelling changes that were released for public consultation last week. Since the consultation process was released, I have had an extraordinary amount of constituents that have contacted me, not only just to let us know how pleased they are that we've eventually started to move forward with country of origin food labelling, but also because they really want to have their say about what this labelling is going to look like. They want to have their say about what they want to see on food products, how they want to be informed about what they're about to put in their mouths and the mouths of their families and their children. I understand that there have been more than 8,500 completed surveys already since it's gone up, and the consultation period only began last week. It's a great start, but 8,500 people is not very many when you consider how many people are in Australia. So I certainly am going to be one that's going to be advocating very strongly for all Australians who are interested to have their say, so that we can actually, for once and for all, get food labelling right in this country. So I urge anybody who thinks this issue is important to participate in the process and to contact their federal member, to contact the department, or to go online and be part of the survey, which will inform the decision that this government makes into the future about what the labelling is going to look like that informs the Australian public about the food and drink that they're about to consume. And the reality is that whilst we've had a lot of talk in this space, Mr Acting Deputy President, it's been a long time coming to get to this stage where we are actually able to have our say about food labelling, and it will be a very long time before we get another opportunity. So I think it's very important and incumbent on Australians who are keen to participate in this process to make sure that they actually have their say. And the other thing that's really worth mentioning is that we often hear, and this is a much discussed subject, and I can't imagine how many inquiries that have been occurred into the various food labelling activities of our various products, whether they be broad food labelling or whether they be specific to commodity group. But the cold hard reality is, if this was an issue that was going to be simply solved, I'm sure it would have been solved by now. It's a very complicated issue, but certainly what we've seen over the last 12 months as this particular inquiry has been going along, and now that we've come up some final recommendations that have gone to consultation, is that we actually are at a stage where we can go to consumers and ask them if to approve or to give us an idea of exactly what they want in this space. The other thing that really does need to be very clearly balanced in this space is that whilst I think there is a strong expectation that consumers want to have clear and simple labelling so that they can understand what products are in their food, but also where those particular food products come from, we have to balance this up with the cost to food manufacturers of providing this information on their labels, because of course the last thing we need to do in this country is to burden our businesses with unnecessary regulation, but also we need to make sure that we meet our international trade obligations as well. So we have to be mindful that we've got a sort of a three-way balance that's going on here in providing this additional information that consumers have been begging for such a long time. I actually think that Australians, by and by, are prepared to spend a little more on Australian food, but we must make sure that the money that the extra money that they're prepared to spend on Australian food actually ends up in the pockets of the farmers and the food producers, and doesn't actually just be a cost impost that's passed on to us because the manufacturers have to spend more to comply with the food labelling requirements. So I think that the benefit of any additional cost that may be generated for being able to identify that the product comes from Australia, because, as I said, I think that Australian consumers are quite happy and aspire to be able to eat Australian food and drink Australian beverages simply because they know that they're going to be safe, they're going to be high quality, and they're supporting their fellow constituents, the farmers and food producers of this country. The complexity of this issue is reflected in the composition of the working group established by the government to develop this new system, and it has included representatives across a wide range of industries, industry, agriculture, trade, small business and health portfolios. And can I put on the record my congratulations to Ministers Macfarlane, Joyce, Robb, Bilson and Nash for their extraordinary collaborative efforts to get this particular proposal to the stage that it is today. I believe informed consumer choice is fundamentally important in a free market system, and the free market is the most efficient mechanism we've ever had to determine the value of goods, services and labour in this country, in fact in any country. Accurate, unambiguous country of origin labelling is going to help Australians demonstrate the value that they place on our safe, clean, green, high-quality food, and how much they value helping the economy, how much they value helping our farmers, and the hundreds and thousands of Australian workers employed in the food and beverage industry and the associated manufacturing industries. So the new system that we're proposing to implement in a time when Australia actually has, I was quite surprised to learn, a $1.8 billion trade deficit in the food and beverage, grocery and fresh produce sector. And believe it or not, that's a 20% improvement on the previous year, thanks to some solid export growth that seems to have been generated since coming into government, probably on the back of the fabulous free trade arrangements that have been negotiated by this government since coming into government in September 2013. And according to the Australian Food and Grocery Council's 2014 State of the Industry report, in 2013-14, the Australian grocery sector imports were valued at $14.9 billion, while our exports were only valued at $4.1 billion, which is an extremely disturbing sort of a statistic when you consider how fabulous the Australian food producers are. Many people, I mean, we still are a net exporter of food, but that is on the back of the fact that we have such huge grain exports, we have live cattle exports, or livestock exports, and also chilled meat exports. So if you take away those big-ticket unprocessed items out of our food exports, you end up with a situation where we have a trade deficit in this space, which I think is a very sad indictment. These figures also demonstrate how exposed we are to food manufacturing standards and ethics of other countries, standards and ethics which don't always meet the expectations of Australian consumers. Recently, food safety incidences have provided a catalyst for this important reform, but let's not distract us from the fundamental reason for undertaking. Australians want to know where their food comes from. So again, I urge everyone who would like to participate in this public consultation process and complete the State of Origin, the Country of Origin food labelling survey to do so.